Guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is the show where I review all the comics I read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between. And before I get started, let me know your pick of the week, because at the end of the video, we talk about the viewer's pick of the week for a chance to be featured on an episode. So let's get started, and I actually had a pretty large haul, 13 books this week, and number 13 for me was Captain America, Sentinel of Liberty, issue 13, and we're kind of gearing towards the end of this run, and I've always been excited about this kind of build up to the Cold War, but it definitely stays true to its name. The Cold War is a very sluggish war. A lot of behind the scenes things that usually go on in a Cold War, and a lot of espionage, and I feel like that's kind of what's focused a little bit more here than actually seeing people butt heads. And you know, for a while that was some great build up, but now as we get to the end, I'm like, I kind of want to see more stuff happening, and in this issue I really got the vibe of that. But I still think the art's good. I still want to see through this series, but I do feel like it's kind of lost a little steam. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 13. Moving on to number 12, and number 12 is The Flash issue 800, and I was actually kind of surprised to see this a little lower. I was looking forward to this book because I wanted to see how Jeremy Adams would finish his run, and it's more towards the anthology side of things. You get some of the biggest writers for The Flash writing. We have Jeff Johns, we have Jeremy Adams, obviously, who is the current and last Flash writer. As we get into a new Flash writer, we had Joshua Williamson. So yeah, we definitely had a lot of big hitters here, but a lot of it's just like, oh, well, let's see Iris and Barry go on a date. Honestly, that was probably one of the better issues. And then as we get to the end of the issue, we get to see the new direction of where the Flash is going to go, and it's much darker, which I don't know if I disliked. I always like to see a comic and a character go in a new direction, especially if a new creative team is taking over. But it also didn't really hook me either. I was like, okay, I'm not a huge fan of Deodato's artwork, so that already kind of was a turnoff for me, and it was just much darker than I expected. So, or at least from what we were getting with Jeremy Adams' run. So overall, I don't think there was anything that really surprised me here, and I don't know if it was much of a celebration of Flash, more just a transition of, okay, Jeremy Adams' run is ending, and a run that he didn't want to end, and now we're kind of getting a new direction for the Flash. It just feels weird because everyone was kind of very happy with where the Flash was going, so it's just a weird transition. And I don't think there was any artwork that really stood out for this issue as well. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 12. Moving on to number 11, another book I'm a bit surprised by being lower, and that's Fence Redemption, issue 1. I really like Fence. It's a book that definitely takes a little bit more from webtoon and manga. I love sports stories, so I was like, oh, I already love that aspect of it all, and then it kind of has a BL lens. It has kind of that angle without it being too romance heavy. You know, I think it's more about the teasing of the romance more than anything. But I like the series. I enjoy the elements that are added here. I think the cartoony, cutesy manga style of art really works for this. But because we already had the first volume of Fence, which was starting with single issues. Then after that, they did a full-on OGN graphic novel. It was only a graphic novel, and they were like, all right, let's go back to single issues. And this issue doesn't really give you, it gives you like a word recap, but it doesn't feel like a new season. It feels like, okay, remember that last graphic novel you read about a year ago? Let's just jump into the next issue. And I kind of wish it kind of eased you into it a little bit more. I'm sure as the series goes on, you will kind of not feel the jarring feeling as much, but yeah, it just kind of felt a little bit more jarring and felt more like a middle of a season 2 than a beginning of a season 3. So giving that 2.5 stars, still obviously going to pick up more and want to see where it goes, but I was a little disappointed with that issue. Moving on to number 10, and number 10 for me is Daredevil issue 12. I feel like this book has lost a little steam for me. I do want to see it through, want to see the ending, but you know, there's elements I enjoyed. I like the Elektra Daredevil literal dance that we get to see with the characters. You're like, okay, they like each other, but also there's some distance here. And then we get to see Daredevil go to hell, but kind of with a different angle of him kind of being this god-like creature as he goes to hell. interesting elements, but nothing that's like, whoa, I'm really into this run again. It's more of like, all right, let's see it through and see where it goes. Artwork is still good for this book. I still like the vibe of it, and I'm just curious to see what direction they're taking it. But I think with Chip Zdarsky being on Batman right now, that's really why we've seen the momentum kind of slow down for Daredevil. So giving that, I believe I gave that either 2.5 or 3. Let's see. I gave that 3 stars. So moving on to number 9, which is In Hell We Fight, issue 1. A new layman book, so the creator of Chew. We now have him not doing art, it's just the writing, and that's why this is actually a little lower. I didn't love the art style for this. It was definitely a little grittier than you would expect, because it kind of has this, I don't want to say cartoony nature because it's in hell, but it's definitely a brighter book than you would expect. So like having this more gritty style artwork, I don't know if it totally worked for her. So I didn't love the line work here, but it was interesting enough. We get to see the introduction of these characters, why they're in hell, and exactly what their mission is. And we don't actually get that until the last page of this issue, which kind of perked my interest a little more, where they're in hell and they find an angel, and you're like, okay, what do we do with this? So I'm like, oh, that's what the story's actually about. It takes a little while to see what the plot is because they are introducing these characters in more an exposition way and not as much charismatically seeing these characters organically find their relationships with each other. And I think that's the piece that was missing, but there is still some elements that I'm like, oh, I want to maybe see where issue 2 goes, but also not enough where I'm like, I need to see where issue 2 goes. So overall, giving that 3 stars, and that is number 9. Moving on to number 8, which is Steelworks issue 1, a book that I don't know was the best first issue, but I really like the ensemble. So I think there's a really interesting set of characters here. We get to see, obviously, Steel, who is our main character. We get to see his niece, I believe, Nat. I think it's his niece. I don't think it's his daughter. I believe it's his niece. Not as familiar with the Steel side of Superman. But also, we get to see Lana Lang, who I love as a character. Loved her as Superwoman, like her journey, and she seems to be a main character of this as well. And then you set up the villains, and it's your standard issue 1. There's a lot of exposition, like almost half the issues, like this is where Steel is. But again, you are building these blocks to be like, okay, he's separating himself from Superman. We're actually getting to see his world a little bit more. The art is actually really, really good for this book as well. Very clean style, which gives me a little bit more of a push to want to read issue 2. And maybe it just kind of has an issue 1 stump here, or stumble. So overall, giving that 3 stars, and that is number 8. Moving on to number 7, surprised to see this not on my top 5, but still a good issue, just a lot of solid books out this week. And that is Dark Knights of Steel, issue 11. There's just a lot of more pointing characters and directions than actually big moments, which obviously understandable because these previous issues have been more about the reveals. And I like the moments between Clark and Bruce a lot where they figure out that they're brothers, or at least now it's out in the open that they're brothers, and we get to see them work together. There's some interesting DC name drops like the Fandom Zone, Amanda Waller being a little trickster in this issue, but there's nothing that's like, whoa, that happened, or even a character moment where I'm like, I was really engrossed. It just was a lot of different solid character moments in this one. And the artwork, I think, was, solid, but there wasn't anything to really, have that jaw-dropping moment. So overall, giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 7. Moving on to number 6, and another week this would have been in my top 5, and that is Batman issue 136. And this issue, we're building into this Catwoman Batman war. I like the more introspective storytelling for Batman, where of course it's similar storytelling what we've seen before, of Batman being like, Bruce Wayne is another person, and Batman needs to do everything in his power, even though he's a little tired, right? Even though he's kind of at his breaking point. And we actually really get to see that internalized in this issue, where we get to see him at his breaking point and also deal with the ramifications of seeing this other version of Selina, and Selina still being that anti-hero, but she's like, yeah, no, I still love you, and like, you gotta trust me, like, I'm not lying to you, I'm still your girl. And I like that. I like that moment between them. I love the Bat Family moment at the end, and it was just a really solid issue overall, and I'm curious to see where this is building up towards. So overall, giving that 4 stars. Great artwork as always, and that is number 6. Moving on to number 5, which is Peacemaker Tries Hard, issue 3, or we have to, or issue 2? Issue 2. And this is just a fun book. I really love the Peacemaker TV show, and I just feel like this has such a distinct voice where it's similar to the show. You do get to see that comedy. You kind of almost hear John Cena as you're reading it, but not too similar where I'm like, I could just watch the show. Peacemaker is a different character in the comics. So I like that we get to see this kind of cool balance of comic Peacemaker and influence from the television show. And it's, you feel bad for the guy. He doesn't have any friends, and this issue is kind of more of a part of that, where he thinks has a friend. You think that he's on a cool mission, that people are looking up to him, and no one does. And that's more of the journey of this issue, and there's a lot of great jokes in between, great artwork as well, and I just think there's a wonderful balance here. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 5. Moving on to number 4, which is John Kent, issue 4, Adventures of Superman. And I love this new Injustice angle. I think it works so well for John. I will say they changed the artist, it seems like, for this one. The colors looked a little flat to me, and I don't think the line work was as strong, which is why this is not as high. But I love John, and I like seeing the more morally gray side of Injustice, where John's like, okay, well, I can't trust Superman. Of course, he's a dictator. And then he goes to Batman, and Batman's kind of done some wrong things too, and we get to see some wonderful character interaction, especially if you've read Injustice in the past. There's a lot of payoff here between, like, Harley and Babs, and especially Damian, and we get to see John explore those relationships. And then also I think they weave in Jay pretty well here too. At first I was a little worried of, like, okay, it seems like Jay has some baggage with Superman and has done bad things to his family. Like, why would he invite John in? And then you get the cliffhanger of, like, oh, maybe he's working with Superman and he knows a little bit more. And that was a really great way to weave Jay. I just thought the character work was well done here. Again, the artwork was probably the only thing that made this a little lower, but I enjoyed the issue, and I really liked the direction of this book. So giving that 4 stars, and that is number 4. It's a lot of 4s. Moving on to number 3, which is Shazam, issue 2. I've been loving this book, and I really like the direction of this arc, where Shazam realizes maybe he can't be, or at least Billy realizes he can't be Shazam anymore, because there's something going on with him. He's saying rude things, he can't control him. All while in the background, we get to see the Shazam family kind of dealing with not being the Captain Marvel family, not having any powers, and we get to see that from different angles. Mary, a little less so, because I don't know how they're connecting it to the previous arc that we saw with her, because I think she still has powers, but it looks like they're tying that into Night Terror. And then, we get to see, I forget Billy's, the Captain Marvel Jr.'s name. Can't think of his name, but we get to see a little bit more of him, and we get to see especially him wanting to get the powers again at the end, which was cool. And honestly, I just thought it was a really well-paced issue. I mean, obviously, Dan Mora does such a great job with the artwork here, and I like that it doesn't seem to forget what's happened with the family, but still making this a Billy Batson story. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 3. Moving on to number 2, I was pleasantly surprised by this book, and that is Spider-Man issue 9. This is definitely more in the vein of what I want my actual Spider-Man, not actual Spider-Man, but the flagship Spider-Man book to be. And I really, really love that this book has become another flagship for Spider-Man, because I think my worry going into Spider-Man, especially because they started with just Spider-Verse, is like, oh, how connected is this going to be to Amazing Spider-Man? And honestly, it is. We really get to see a lot of those beats being played out with J. Jonah Jameson knowing that Peter is Spider-Man. The Gold Goblin stuff is really played out here really well. And then you kind of have this unique angle of him having these heightened spider sense, and that's the bigger arc that's happening in this issue. All while Spider-Boy's in the background, where everyone's really excited to see who he is. You kind of have that big reveal, but it's not the only thing that they're focusing on. So it's like, okay, I just want to know who Spider-Boy is. It doesn't matter right now, because it's not the only story that's being played out. And then you have some more of the nostalgic, Electro cliffhanger in the end, so you get to see some villains that you're used to. I just thought it was a well-balanced issue, and kind of the storytelling I've missed with Spider-Man, and maybe something that could only be done in something that's not called the Amazing Spider-Man and is your secondary flagship like Spider-Man. So I liked it. And Mark Bagley, obviously you have this classic art style with him, and I'm excited to see what direction this goes in. And being the title of this video is Dan Slott's run the best Spider-Man run right now? And I honestly say yes. And I keep always going back to Dan Slott and because he's had such a long run on Spider-Man, is the last time I think I really loved Spider-Man. Now, granted, there's a lot of pieces I liked about Nick Spencer's run until we kind of got to the end and dealt with the bigger villain over there, but I really liked that Dan Slott took a shot and took a chance on a lot of things. Superior Spider-Man being obviously the huge one, but then, you know, like the death of Flash Thompson, and those are things that I remember, and they didn't feel like teases, obviously, because Superior Spider-Man lasted like over a year. So I miss gutsy storytelling, but still having the love of Spider-Man behind it, and that's why I very much enjoyed Dan Slott's run, and why I'm currently enjoying this current run that he has as well. So giving this 4 stars, that is number 2 for me. Number 1 for me is my pick of the week, Fandom Road, issue 4. I've been loving this book. This is just such a subtle book. It's paced in such an interesting way where you are getting information in every issue, right? You open up with this really organic conversation between our 2 leads of like, okay, well, who are you, really? Like, we've been hanging out with each other. We have to hang out with each other. Like, tell me a little bit more. And they give just the right amount of information where you still don't exactly know what happened in their past, but you're like, okay, they're both hiding something and they don't want to tell each other, but they're starting to open up. It just feels very organic and real the way that happens. All while the agent, that character who's also been kind of thrown into this phantom zone, let's even say, these creatures, she also has some secrets, and all while we're learning about this world, because we don't actually know what's happening. We're in the point of view of these 3 characters who also are kind of learning about this world along the way. And I love that every issue you just get a little information, a little bit of movement, to keep this mystery alive, but also not make it boring. And I think the more gray visuals for this really works for this white canvas that they're really trying to play with, that I've been really enjoying. I just think it's really, really well done, really well balanced. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is my pick of the week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno. Let me know in the comments below what your pick of the week was. And the viewer's pick of the week was Local Man issue 4. And here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.